Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to go over the difference of sums, difference of cubes and sum of cubes factoring formulas, factoring methods. I've got a lot of questions on these about the best ways to do them, so I'm going to go through a few examples. Now I've put up the two general formulas for each of these problems. So in general we say a cubed plus b cubed equals a plus b times a squared minus ab plus b squared, and you can see the same thing for a cubed minus b cubed. Now, if you're the type of person who prefers formulas, you can go ahead and memorize those. They'll always work. One thing that I like to do is I prefer, instead of memorizing formulas, when I can, to work with try to find a method of remembering it, or a pattern that they'll fall into. And you'll notice with both of these, one of the patterns is, every time you factor it, and this is assuming we factored out a GCF, any greatest common factors, you'll notice that they are always made up of a binomial and a trinomial. So we have our binomial here and our trinomial each time. So let me do an example, and we're going to base it off of this. And you also notice that the format is generally the same. AB, a squared, AB, and b squared, and so on. Let's try, for example, x to the third minus 64. Like I said, assuming we've factored out the GCF, we're always going to have a binomial and a trinomial. The binomial is probably the best one to start with, because everything's based off the binomial. And it's always cube root. So the cube root of x to the third becomes x, and I put that as the first term of my binomial. The cube root of 64 is 4. So I've made my binomial. Now you notice I'm not putting in signs yet, and I'll get to that in a second. The trinomial is based off this binomial. So the first term of the trinomial, you'll see there's a squared. So what that means is whatever this first term of the binomial is, in this case x, we square it, and that becomes our first term of our trinomial. So when we square x, we get, of course, x squared. Next, we look at our middle term. Our middle term, as you can see with these examples, with the formulas, is ab, or the product of a times b, which means the product of x and 4 becomes our middle term. So it's just 4x. Our last term from the trinomial, you can see in these examples, or the formulas, is b squared. So whatever my b value is, in this case, that means whatever the second term of the binomial is, in this case 4, I square that. So 4 squared is 16. So what's important is the binomial and the trinomial and those terms. And again, I haven't put in any signs yet because the signs are set. It's not so important that you memorize is it always is it negative 16 plus, because it's always, like I said, a set format that these signs are going to be. And the way to remember it is this, the way that I prefer anyways. The binomial always matches the original question. So since it was x cubed minus 64, it's x minus 4. Our next sign, between the x squared and the 4x, is always the opposite of the first, opposite of the original, or the opposite of the binomial. So since the binomial was negative, this is a plus. Our last term, our 16, no matter whether we're doing subtraction or addition of cubes, it's always addition. And there's our answer. Let's look at another example. Let's try 8. I'll say a. Let's not use a. Let's stay away from the a's and b's for a minute. I'll say 8. Let's just go back to x. X to the third plus this time. I'll say 27. Y to the third. So like before, assuming we've taken out the GCF, my first part of this is a binomial, followed by a trinomial. The binomial I get by taking the cube root of both my parts. So we start by, what is the cube root of 8x to the third? You can think of it as the cube root of 8, which is 2, with the cube root of x to the third, which is just x. What is the cube root of 27y to the third? Similarly, the cube root of 27 is 3. The cube root of y to the third is y. And now again, so that's first and usually the most important part. I've gotten the binomial down by taking the cube root of both parts of my original problem. Now I'm going to make my trinomial. So again, like I said, trinomial, the first term of the trinomial is based off the first term of our binomial. It's the square. So when I square 2x, I'll get 4, because 2 squared is 4, and then an x squared. And it's important to make sure you square both parts. So for example, it would be incorrect to say it's 4x. It's got to be 4x squared. My middle term is the product of both parts of the binomial. So we're saying now, what is 2x times 3y? That is 6xy. Our last term is always the product, or excuse me, is the second term of the binomial squared. So we're saying, what is 3y squared? You get 9 from squaring 3, and then y squared, of course, is y squared. So again, here are my terms. Again, I haven't done signs yet. Last, I'll fill in signs. I said the binomial always matches the original, so it's plus. The second sign always is opposite of the binomial, so in this case, minus. Our last term is always plus no matter what. And there's our factored form. So this is the pattern that I like to follow with these problems. Let me do one more, just to hopefully drive home the point. I'll say 216, let's do minus, and I'll say 343 y to the third. Let me use some bigger numbers. Again, we've factored out any GCFs. We identified that I can take the cube root of all of my terms, so we can use difference in this case of cubes. So I need a binomial, and I need a trinomial. The binomial I'll get by taking the cube root of 216, which is 6, and the cube root of 343 y to the third, which is 7y. For my trinomial, again, to get the first term, I square the first term of my binomial. And it's important to go by the order that's originally set, so 36 comes first. Oftentimes, people will think, well, since we're usually used to seeing the variable coming first, we should put the variable first, and that's not the case. You always go by the order that's presented. My middle term is a product of 6 and 7y, so it gives me a 42y. And my last term is where I square the second term of my binomial. So when I square 7y, I'll get 49y squared. Let me make that a little more clear. There we go. So lastly, I need to put in my signs. The original always matches, or the binomial always matches the original. My next sign is always opposite, and my last sign is always plus. So this is a review of factoring difference of cubes and sum of cubes. Hopefully this makes it a little more clear to you.